The first black SUV arrived, just as the cathedral bells began to ring. Grace Ellison stood behind the carved oak doors of St. Augustine's Cathedral with a veil over her face, a bouquet trembling in her gloved hands, and a diamond engagement ring cutting into her finger like a beautiful lie. Outside, rain slid down the stained glass windows in silver veins. Inside, 400 guests waited beneath vaulted ceilings and gold chandeliers, whispering over silk programs embossed with her name and the name of the man she was supposed to marry, Julian Ashcroft. The perfect groom, the perfect smile, the perfect monster. Grace could hear the orchestra beginning the bridal march, soft strings rising like something sacred. Her father's oldest business partners sat in the front pews. Her mother's former friends dabbed their eyes with lace handkerchiefs. New York society photographers hovered near the aisle, ready to capture the moment Grace stepped into a future everyone else had chosen for her. Behind her, her maid of honor adjusted the train of her gown and whispered, "You look perfect." Grace looked down at her bouquet. White roses. Her mother had hated white roses. Julian had chosen them anyway. A bruise darkened beneath the lace at Grace's wrist, hidden beneath the sleeve of her custom wedding dress. Julian had grabbed her there 2 nights earlier when she told him she wanted to postpone the wedding. He had smiled while doing it, because Julian smiled when he hurt people. "You don't understand what you inherited," he had whispered. "But you will. After Saturday, everything your mother left behind belongs to us." Not me, Grace had realized. Us. His lawyers. His father. His investors. The silent men who had begun appearing at family dinners. Men with flat eyes and expensive watches, who never removed their coats. She had tried to run that morning. She had made it as far as the back hallway of the hotel before 2 security guards gently, politely, publicly turned her around. Julian had been waiting in her suite, drinking champagne. "You're nervous," he said as if she were a child. "I don't want this," she told him. His eyes had gone empty. Then he had touched her cheek with 2 fingers and said, "By tonight, no one will care what you want." Now she stood at the cathedral doors, seconds away from walking toward him. The bells rang again. Then they stopped. Not faded. Stopped. The orchestra faltered. A violin note cracked and died. Somewhere beyond the doors, a murmur moved through the cathedral, low and confused. Grace lifted her head. Outside, through the rain-streaked side window, she saw the first black SUV stop at the curb. Then another. Then another. They lined the street like shadows arriving for a funeral. The driver's side doors opened in perfect silence. Men in black coats stepped out, not rushing, not speaking, not looking at the cameras already turning toward them. They carried themselves with the calm of men who did not ask permission to enter any room on earth. Grace's breath caught. Her maid of honor whispered, "Who are they?" Grace did not answer, because at the center of those black vehicles, beneath the cathedral's stone archway, one man stepped into the rain without an umbrella. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black suit under a long wool coat, dark hair slicked by the storm. His face was carved in cold restraint, the kind of face that belonged on warning posters and whispered conversations. Luca Moretti. Everyone in New York knew his name. No one said it too loudly. The Moretti family owned nightclubs, ports, construction companies, security firms, politicians, judges, and entire city blocks that changed hands without paperwork. Luca had inherited the empire at 29 after his father was shot outside a private restaurant in Little Italy. By 35, he had become the man even older criminals lowered their voices around. He did not run. He did not shout. He never had to. Grace had seen him only once before, 8 years ago, at her mother's funeral. He had stood beneath a cypress tree far from the mourners, holding a black umbrella, watching the coffin disappear into the earth. Grace had been 19, and too devastated to ask why a man like him would mourn a woman like her mother. Now he was walking into her wedding. The cathedral doors opened from the inside. The bridal march died completely. 100 guests turned. Grace froze. Luca stepped into the church with rain on his shoulders and silence at his back. Every camera shifted. Every whisper stopped. Even the groom's party seemed to forget how to breathe. At the altar, Julian Ashcroft stiffened. For one beautiful second, his perfect smile vanished. Luca did not look at the guests. He did not look at the priest. He did not even look at the armed security trying to decide whether they were brave enough to move. He looked only at Grace, through the veil, through the lie, through the careful makeup hiding what Julian had done. and when he spoke, his voice was calm enough to be terrifying. "Tell them why you were crying." The words crossed the cathedral like a blade. Grace's fingers tightened around the bouquet until a thorn pierced her glove. Julian recovered fast. Too fast. His smile returned, polished and public. "Mr. Moretti," he called from the altar. "This is a private ceremony." Luca's eyes did not leave Grace. "No," he said, "it's a transaction." A ripple went through the guests. Julian laughed once, lightly, performing for the room. "Grace, darling, come here." Grace did not move. Julian took one step down from the altar. Luca's men did not reach for weapons. They didn't need to. The air shifted anyway. Grace looked at Luca's face and felt a terrifying thing happen inside her chest. Recognition. Not of him. Of safety. It made no sense. Luca Moretti was dangerous. He was the kind of man fathers warned daughters about. The kind of man who walked into sacred places, with rain on his coat and blood on his history. But he was also the only person in the cathedral looking at her as if her silence mattered. Julian's jaw tightened. "Grace," he said again, softer now, sharper. "Don't embarrass yourself." That was when Luca finally looked at him. The temperature in the cathedral seemed to drop. "You grabbed her wrist 2 nights ago," Luca said. Julian went still. Grace's heart slammed. Luca continued, voice low, controlled. "Left hand. Hotel suite. 11:40, 2 p.m. You told her no one would care what she wanted." The guests began whispering louder. Julian's father rose from the front pew. "This is outrageous." Luca turned his head slightly. "Sit down." The older man sat. Grace saw it happen and felt the world tilt. Julian stepped off the altar completely now. Rage slipping through the cracks of his charm. "You have no right to be here." Luca's mouth barely moved. "Her mother gave me that right." Grace stopped breathing. Her mother. The church vanished for a moment. The chandeliers, the guests, the rain, the cameras. All of it blurred behind one impossible sentence. Julian saw her reaction and moved toward her. "Grace," he snapped. "Enough." He reached for her arm. Luca moved. Not fast. Not violently. Just decisively. 1 second he was 10 feet away. The next, he was between them. His hand closing around Julian's wrist, before Julian could touch her. The silence that followed was absolute. Julian's face went pale. Luca leaned closer and spoke so quietly only Grace and Julian heard. "If you touch her again, the only thing your guests will remember about this wedding is how you screamed." Julian's lips parted. Grace should have been afraid. Some part of her was. But another part, the part that had been shrinking for months inside Julian's polished cage, suddenly remembered how to stand. She lifted her veil. The cameras flashed. Her face was pale. Her eyes were wet. Her mouth trembled once before she controlled it. "I don't want to marry him," she said. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. The cathedral erupted. Julian lunged. Luca turned, caught Grace around the waist, and swept her off her feet before Julian could reach her. The bouquet fell. White roses scattered across the marble aisle like broken bones. Grace gasped as Luca carried her against his chest, her wedding dress spilling over his black coat. His heart beat steadily beneath her palm. The scent of rain, cedar, and smoke clung to him. "Put me down," she whispered, because fear and pride arrived together. "No," Luca said. "You can't just carry me out of my own wedding." His eyes remained forward. "I just did." The doors opened. Rain roared into the cathedral. Luca carried her down the steps into the storm, while photographers screamed questions and guests poured after them. Black SUVs formed a wall around the cathedral. Luca's men moved with cold precision, blocking cameras, opening doors, watching rooftops. Grace looked back once. Julian stood at the top of the steps, drenched in humiliation, his perfect mask finally gone. And behind him, one of the silent men from his family's dinner table was on the phone, staring at Luca with hatred. Luca noticed too. His arms tightened around Grace. "Close your eyes," he said. "Why?" "Because the world you knew ended 10 seconds ago." Then gunfire cracked through the rain. Grace flinched against him as glass exploded from the side window of a parked car. Luca turned his body, shielding her completely. His back taking the spray of shattered glass as his men surged around them. The sound of the storm swallowed the screams. Luca shoved Grace into the SUV and climbed in after her. The door slammed. Tires screamed against wet pavement. The cathedral disappeared behind them, in a blur of flashing cameras, black coats, and rain. Grace sat frozen in her wedding dress, her veil torn, her chest heaving. Luca Moretti sat beside her, calm as midnight. A thin cut bled near his temple. She stared at it. "You're bleeding," she whispered. He touched the cut, looked at the blood on his fingers, and said, "Not enough to matter." Grace laughed once. It came out broken. "What is happening?" Luca looked at her then. Really looked. The coldness in his face shifted. Not softened, but focused. Like all his violence had found one fragile thing it refused to let break. "Your fiancé sold you," he said. Grace went still. The SUV sped through Manhattan rain. "Your inheritance," Luca continued. "Your mother's trust. The Ellison coastal estate. 3 offshore accounts. A shipping corridor hidden inside your family's foundation. Julian's marriage contract would have given him control of all of it within 6 months." Grace shook her head slowly. "No. That's not possible." "Do." "It is. My lawyers reviewed everything. His lawyers replaced yours." Her stomach dropped. Outside, the city blurred silver and black through the windows. People walked under umbrellas. Taxis splashed through puddles. Restaurants glowed warmly. The whole world continued as if Grace had not just been dragged out of her life. She looked down at her wrist. The bruise was visible now where her lace sleeve had torn. Luca followed her gaze. Something dark moved through his face. "You knew?" she asked. "I knew enough. Enough to crash my wedding? Enough to stop it. Why?" Her voice sharpened because fear needed somewhere to go. "Why do you care?" He looked away. For the first time since he had entered the cathedral, Luca Moretti did not answer immediately. The silence frightened her more than the gunfire. Then he said, "Your mother asked me to." Grace's throat tightened. "My mother died 8 years ago." "I know. You knew her?" "Yes." "How?" His jaw flexed once. "That story is not for this car." Grace stared at him, anger rising beneath the shock. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to appear at my wedding, carry me out like I belong to you, tell me my dead mother gave you some kind of right, and then decide what I'm allowed to know." His eyes returned to hers. For a moment, the air between them changed. Dangerously. Not romantic. Not yet. Something sharper. A collision of control and resistance. "You're right," he said. Grace blinked. "I don't own you," Luca continued. "I never will." The words hit harder than they should have. Julian had said ownership without ever using the word. Luca said the opposite with blood on his temple and a citywide scandal unfolding behind them. Grace looked away first. "Where are you taking me?" "Somewhere Julian can't reach you." "My apartment. Compromised." "My phone?" "Tracked." "My bank accounts?" "Frozen by morning." She turned toward him. "You planned this." "I prepared for it." "That's not better." "No," he said quietly. "But you're alive." The SUV plunged into a tunnel beneath the city. Orange lights flickered across Luca's face, revealing bruises beneath his collar, old scars near his knuckles, the controlled stillness of a man who had survived by feeling nothing where others could see it. Grace hated that she noticed. Hated more that she felt safer beside him than she had at the altar. When the SUV emerged from the tunnel, Manhattan was behind them. Ahead, the storm opened over the dark coastline. Luca's mansion sat on a cliff 2 hours outside the city, built from steel, glass, and black stone, overlooking a violent Atlantic Sea. It looked less like a home than a fortress, designed by someone who trusted no horizon. By the time they arrived, Grace had stopped shivering from the cold and started shivering from everything else. A woman in a gray suit met them at the entrance. "The East Wing is secure. Dr. Bell is waiting. Media is already calling it a kidnapping." Grace laughed bitterly. "Of course they are." Luca glanced at the woman. "No one speaks to the press." "Understood." Grace stepped out of the SUV before Luca could help her. Her wedding heels slipped on the wet stone. Luca's hand moved instinctively toward her waist, then stopped inches away. He did not touch her. She noticed. He noticed that she noticed. The silence between them thickened. Inside, the mansion was warm but lonely. Tall windows faced the storm. Dark wood floors gleamed beneath low golden lights. There were no family photos, no clutter, no softness. Everything expensive. Everything controlled. A doctor examined Grace's wrist in a private room overlooking the ocean. Luca stood by the doorway, arms crossed, face unreadable. Grace refused to wince. The doctor wrapped the bruise gently. "Nothing broken," she said. But it's deep. Luca's eyes lowered to the bandage. Grace saw his hand curl into a fist. Don't, she said. The doctor left. Luca looked at her. Don't what? Look like that. Like what? Like you're deciding whether to destroy someone. He held her gaze. I decided that in the cathedral. Grace swallowed. A flash of lightning lit the windows behind him. For 1 second, he looked like something from a dark painting. Powerful, beautiful in a cold, dangerous way. Completely impossible to belong to anyone. You can't kill Julian, she said. Luca's mouth barely changed. I can. I'm serious. So am I. If you hurt him, this becomes exactly what everyone thinks it is. A mafia abduction, a revenge spectacle. He'll look like the victim, and I'll look like a helpless bride stolen by a criminal. Luca watched her carefully. The way his expression shifted told her he had expected fear, panic, maybe gratitude. Not strategy. Grace lifted her chin. If you want to help me, don't make him bleed. Make him exposed. Something flickered in Luca's eyes. Fascination. There it was, dangerous and unwilling. You sound like your mother, he said. Grace's anger softened into pain so quickly it almost knocked her breath out. Stop saying that unless you're ready to explain. Luca looked toward the storm. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he walked to a cabinet, unlocked it, and removed a small leather folder. He placed it on the table between them, but did not open it. Your mother came to me 3 months before she died, he said. Grace could not move. She knew someone was restructuring the Ellison trust. Moving assets. Changing beneficiaries. She believed your father's old partners were involved. She was wrong. Who was it? Julian's family. The Ashcrofts had been planning this for years. Grace's stomach twisted. My mother knew Julian? His father. Luca's voice hardened. Victor Ashcroft. He courted your mother before she married your father. When she rejected him, he spent 2 decades waiting for a way back into the Ellison fortune. Grace touched the edge of the folder. Why would she come to you? Luca's expression closed. Because my family owed her. For what? He looked at her then, and there was something old in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or grief sharpened into restraint. My father destroyed someone she loved. Grace's hand froze. The storm beat against the windows. Luca opened the folder. Inside were documents, photographs, and a handwritten letter sealed in a plastic sleeve. Grace recognized the handwriting immediately. Her mother's. Her chest caved in. No, she whispered. She reached for the letter, but her fingers shook too badly. Luca did not touch her. He simply waited. Grace unfolded it. My darling Grace, if you are reading this, then the world has become more dangerous than I ever wanted you to know. There are men who will love what you own more than who you are. There are men who will call possession protection. There are men who will place a ring on your finger and call it destiny when it is only a cage. If that day comes, find Luca Moretti. Do not trust him easily. But know this, he made me a promise. And unlike good men, dangerous men sometimes keep promises because they cannot afford to break the few pieces of honor they have left. Grace could not read the rest. The room blurred. She pressed the letter to her chest and turned away before Luca could see her face break. But Luca saw anyway. He saw everything. That was the problem. You had this the whole time? She asked. Yes. Why didn't you come sooner? I tried. Grace turned back. When? 3 years ago. When you got engaged. His voice was flat, but the muscle in his jaw moved. You refused to see me. But. Indice. But. Dot. 9. Lure. Dot. 9. 92. 92. Grace stared at him. I never knew. Julian intercepted the request. Her blood went cold. 6 months ago. Luca continued. I sent a lawyer to discuss your mother's trust. He was killed in a hit. And. Run. 2 days later. Grace gripped the chair. 2 weeks ago, your personal assistant began sending Julian copies of your private messages. 4 days ago, your driver was replaced. Yesterday, the marriage contract was amended. He paused. Today you were supposed to sign away your life. Grace sat down slowly. Everything she thought had been bad was worse. Julian's cruelty had not been emotion. It had been logistics. Every apology, every gift, every public kiss, every private threat, all part of an acquisition. Luca closed the folder. I could not wait longer. Grace laughed softly, empty and devastated. So you surrounded my wedding with SUVs. Yes. And carried me out in front of everyone. Yes. And now the whole country thinks I ran away with a mafia boss. His gaze lowered to her wedding dress, then returned to her face. Did you? The question was quiet. Too quiet. Grace felt heat rise beneath her skin despite everything. No, she said. Luca nodded once, as if reminding himself. Good. Something about the word made her pulse shift. Not because it was tender, because it was restrained. A man like Luca Moretti did not take what he wanted unless he chose not to. That made his restraint more dangerous than another man's desire. Grace stood abruptly. I need to change. A bedroom had been prepared for her in the East Wing. Someone had laid out simple clothes. Black pants. A cream sweater. Soft socks. No lace. No diamonds. No wedding dress. Grace locked the door behind her and struggled out of the gown alone. It took 15 minutes. The zipper jammed halfway down her back, and for a moment she stood there, trapped in silk and rage, breathing too hard. She almost called for help. Not Luca. Anyone but Luca. Then she saw herself in the mirror. Mascara faint beneath her eyes, hairpins slipping loose. A bruise at her wrist, a dead woman's letter on the bed. Grace gripped the edge of the dresser. She would not cry over Julian. She would not cry over the wedding. But she cried over her mother. Quietly, furiously. With one hand over her mouth, so no one would hear. A knock came at the door. Grace froze. Grace, Luca said from the other side. She wiped her face. What? May I come in? No. A pause. Are you hurt? The question was so controlled it was almost cold. But something beneath it trembled. Grace looked at the stuck zipper and laughed despite herself. Only by French couture. Silence. Then, I can send Elena. I don't know who Elena is. My housekeeper. Grace hesitated. The wedding dress felt like a cage. She wanted it off. She wanted every thread Julian had chosen burned. Fine, she said. Send her. Footsteps retreated. A minute later, Elena arrived, a kind older woman with silver hair and intelligent eyes. She helped Grace out of the gown without asking questions. When the dress fell to the floor, Grace stepped out of it like escaping a body. Elena folded it over her arm. Mr. Moretti asked what you would like done with it, she said. Grace looked at the gown. It had cost more than most people made in a year. Julian had chosen the designer. The neckline. The veil. The sleeves that hid bruises. Burn it, Grace said. Elena's eyes flicked up. Grace surprised herself by not taking it back. Please. Elena nodded. When Grace emerged from the room 20 minutes later, the mansion was quiet, except for the storm. She found Luca outside on the terrace. Rain fell hard over the cliffside. The ocean below crashed white against black rocks. Luca stood beneath no shelter, coat discarded, sleeves rolled to his forearms, speaking into a phone in Italian so low and sharp it made the rain feel louder. Grace stopped at the doorway. A fire burned in a stone basin at the edge of the terrace. Her wedding dress was inside it. Silk curled into flame. Lace blackened. The veil disappeared first. Luca ended the call and turned. Grace stared at the fire. You did it, she said. You asked. Most men would have told me it was too expensive. I am not most men. No, she said softly. You're worse. His eyes sharpened. She stepped onto the terrace. Rain touched her hair, her face, the cream sweater. Luca moved as if to tell her to go back inside, but stopped himself. You're dangerous, Grace said. You control people. You scare rooms into silence. You watched me without telling me. You have files on my life. Yes, the honesty unsettled her. And yet, she continued, voice quieter, you are the only person today who asked me to say what I wanted. The fire reflected in his eyes. That should not make me good. It doesn't. Luca looked almost satisfied by that. Grace walked closer to the burning dress. Heat touched her wet skin. Why did my mother trust you? Luca's face closed again. She didn't. But she asked you to protect me. Trust and necessity are different things. Grace studied him. What did your father do? Luca looked out at the ocean. For a while she thought he would not answer. Then he said, My father ordered the death of a man named Samuel Vale. He was your mother's first love. A journalist. He had evidence tying my father to a port bombing. Of Colossus. End of court. Grace's chest tightened. My mother never told me. She married your father a year later. Did she love him? Yes. Luca's answer came quickly. But grief leaves rooms inside people. Grace looked at him then, really looked. You speak like you know. His mouth tightened. I know rooms. The words should not have affected her. They did. Before she could answer, a phone rang inside the house. Luca's head turned. A younger man appeared at the terrace door. Boss. You need to see this. They moved to a private security room beneath the mansion, where screens covered the wall. News channels played footage from the cathedral. Luca carrying Grace, Julian shouting in the rain, guests screaming after the gunshots. The headline read, Heiress abducted by Mafia Boss at society wedding. Grace's stomach twisted. Another channel showed Julian standing beneath umbrellas outside the cathedral, face pale, voice shaking perfectly for the cameras. My fiancé was taken from me today, he said. Grace has been under emotional stress for weeks. Luca Moretti exploited that vulnerability. Grace's hands curled. Julian continued, We believe she is being held against her will. Luca's expression did not change, but the room did. His men became very still. Grace stepped closer to the screen. Julian looked directly into the camera. Grace, if you can hear me, I forgive you. Come home. Something inside her went cold and clean. No, she said. Luca looked at her. Grace turned to the men in the room. Can I make a statement? Luca's consigliere, Marco, raised an eyebrow. Publicly? Yes. Luca said, No. Grace spun toward him. Excuse me? No. You don't get to decide that. I do when Julian's waiting for you to appear on camera so his people can trace the location. I'm not going to sit here while he paints me as unstable. You're alive here. I'm invisible here. The room went silent. Luca's eyes darkened. Grace stepped closer, anger burning through fear. That's what men like Julian depend on. Silence. Closed rooms. Concerned statements. They turn women into rumors, and then bury the truth beneath sympathy. Luca held her gaze. You want to fight him in public, he said. I want to stop being rescued in private. Something shifted in his face. Not softness. Recognition. He turned to Marco. Set up a controlled feed. No location markers. No windows. No live questions. Marco nodded. Grace blinked. Just like that? Luca looked at her. You were right. The words felt dangerous again, because he meant them. 15 minutes later, Grace sat in front of a dark wall in Luca's security room, still wearing the cream sweater, her hair damp from rain, no jewelry except the engagement ring Julian had placed on her finger. The camera light turned red. Grace looked into it. My name is Grace Ellison, she said. I was not abducted. I left my wedding because I did not consent to the marriage. Julian Ashcroft does not speak for me. His family does not control me, and if he wants to continue lying to the press, I will start telling the truth about the contract he forced me to sign. Marco ended the feed. Within minutes, the internet exploded. Within an hour, Julian filed an emergency petition claiming Grace was under coercive control. By midnight, a judge with Ashcroft connections issued a temporary order freezing Grace's assets until her well-being could be verified. Grace stared at the legal notice on the screen. Luca stood beside her, silent. They're trapping me, she said. Yes. My money, my trust, my mother's estate. Yes. And if I go to court, Julian's people will be waiting. Grace looked up at him. Then what do we do? Luca's eyes were cold. We stop reacting. He turned to Marco. Find Victor Ashcroft's Belandi contact. Trace the judge. Wake the accountant. Then he looked back at Grace. And you need to see your mother's house. Grace's mother's house was not in New York. It stood on a private strip of coastline in Maine, hidden behind pine trees and locked gates, facing a gray sea that looked older than memory. Grace had not been there since she was 18. After her mother's death, her father had told her the property was tied up in legal disputes. Another lie. They drove north before dawn in a convoy of black SUVs, through rain that turned to mist, then cold coastal fog. Grace sat beside Luca in the back seat, wrapped in his coat because she had refused twice, and accepted on the third when her hands would not stop shaking. His coat smelled like cedar and smoke. She hated that it comforted her. Halfway there, she woke from a brief, restless sleep to find Luca watching the road, not her. You don't sleep? She asked. When necessary. That's not an answer. It is the answer. She shifted under his coat. Do you always talk like every sentence is classified? He looked at her then. A faint shadow of amusement passed through his eyes and vanished. No. Grace waited. He said nothing else. She almost smiled. Almost. The gates opened as they arrived at the Ellison coastal estate. The house was beautiful in a lonely way. White stone, dark shutters, wild grass bending in the wind. Waves crashed beyond the cliffs. A greenhouse leaned against the east side, glass fogged by years of neglect. Grace stepped out slowly. The air smelled like salt, pine, and childhood. Her mother had once stood in that doorway wearing a blue sweater, waving Grace inside from the cold. Grace remembered her laugh, her hands covered in soil from the greenhouse. The way she used to say, "Never marry a man who wants your light but resents the heat." Grace pressed a hand to her mouth. Luca stood a few feet behind her, giving her space. It made the grief worse. Julian always invaded pain. Luca stood guard around it. Inside, dust-covered white sheets and locked furniture. Luca's men moved through the house, checking rooms, windows, exits. Grace walked into the library alone. A portrait of her mother hung above the fireplace. Vivienne Ellison. Beautiful. Sharp-eyed. Impossible to reduce to a victim. Grace stared at the painting and whispered, "What did you hide from me?" Behind her, Luca said, "Enough to keep you alive." She turned. "You knew this house was still mine?" "Yes. Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Because the house is the key." "To what?" Luca crossed the room and pressed his palm against the carved wooden mantel. A hidden panel clicked open. Grace stared. Inside was a small brass key and a sealed envelope. Her name was written across the front. Grace took it with shaking hands. Another letter. "Grace, if you are here, then the men I feared have become bold enough to touch your future. There is a vault beneath the greenhouse. The key is not enough. You are the second lock. Never open it for a man you fear. Never open it for a man who calls control love. And if Luca Moretti is beside you, remember this. He is not innocent, but he knows the cost of promises." Grace lowered the letter. "The second lock?" she whispered. Luca's gaze dropped to her hand. "To protect the trust, your mother used a biometric system. Bloodline verification." "My blood." "Yes." Grace laughed once, softly horrified. "Of course my mother turned my inheritance into a ghost story." She was cautious. She was hunted. Luca did not deny it. The greenhouse was colder than the house. Rain tapped against cracked glass. Dead vines twisted along iron frames. At the far end, beneath a stone planter, filled with dry soil, Luca found the second mechanism. The floor opened. Grace descended first, refusing Luca's hand because she needed to prove to herself that she still could. Beneath the greenhouse was a vault room carved into stone. Lights flickered on automatically. At the center stood a steel safe built into the wall. Beside it, a digital scanner waited. Grace inserted the brass key. A screen lit up. "Identity required." Luca stood close behind her. Too close. The air was cold, but she felt him like heat at her back. "Grace," he said quietly. "Once you open it, there's no going back." She looked over her shoulder. "Was there ever?" His eyes held hers. "No." Grace placed her thumb on the scanner. A needle pricked her skin. The safe unlocked. Inside were documents, hard drives, ledgers, and a small velvet box. Grace opened the box first. A ring lay inside. Not a diamond. A simple gold band engraved with initials. V, E, and S. V. Vivienne Ellison and Samuel Vale. Her mother's first love. Grace touched it gently. Then she saw the photograph underneath. Her mother, younger and laughing, standing beside Samuel Vale. And behind them, half turned away from the camera, was a boy of maybe 16. Dark hair. Cold eyes even then. "Luca." Grace looked up. "You knew him," she said. Luca's expression had gone still. "Samuel? He saved my life." The words landed heavily. Luca stared at the photograph as if it had reached into him and found a place he kept locked. "My father ordered the port bombing," he said. "I was there, 16 years old, thought I was being taught business." His mouth hardened. "Samuel pulled me out before the second blast. He died getting evidence away from my father's men." Grace's throat tightened. "My mother loved him." "Yes." "And your family killed him." "Yes." "Then why would she ever trust you?" Luca looked at her. "Because I helped her bury the evidence my father wanted destroyed." Grace stepped back slightly. The vault felt smaller. "You were 16, old enough to know what blood looked like on innocent people." Grace searched his face. "That's why you promised her. His voice lowered. No, I promised her because 8 years ago, when she came to me dying, she said if I wanted to be better than my father, I could start by saving his last victim's daughter. Grace absorbed that in silence. Then the lights went out. For 1 second, there was only darkness. Then Luca's arm swept around her waist and pulled her behind him. A red emergency light blinked near the stairwell. Marco's voice crackled through Luca's earpiece. Boss. Perimeter breach. Multiple vehicles. Belandi men. Grace's blood turned cold. Luca reached inside his coat. Grace caught his wrist. He looked down at her hand. Don't kill anyone for me, she whispered. His face was unreadable in the red light. They came here to take you. I know. His voice dropped. Then do not ask me to be civilized. Footsteps sounded above. Luca turned fully toward her. For the first time, she saw something like fear behind his control. Not fear for himself. For here. Listen to me, he said. There's a tunnel behind that wall. It leads to the cliff path. Marco will meet you. What about you? I'll hold them here. No. Grace. No, she said again, harder. I am done being moved from room to room while men decide which danger is acceptable. His eyes flashed. This is not a negotiation. It is if my life is the subject. A shot cracked above. Grace flinched. Luca's hand rose toward her face, stopped before touching, then closed into a fist. That almost touch did something unbearable to her. Please, he said. The word was so quiet she almost missed it. Luca Moretti, who had silenced a cathedral with 1 sentence, was asking. Grace stared at him. Then she nodded once. Don't die, she said. Something changed in his face. A near confession, strangled before it could breathe. He opened the tunnel door. Grace stepped inside, then looked back. Luca stood in the red-lit vault with rainwater dripping through the cracked greenhouse above, a dangerous man framed by her mother's secrets. Luca. His eyes found hers. I still don't trust you. His mouth curved faintly, without humor. Good. Then he shut the door between them. The tunnel was narrow, cold, and wet. Grace ran with one hand against the stone wall, and the folder of evidence clutched against her chest. Behind her, muffled gunfire echoed through the earth. Not constant. Controlled. Precise. Each sound made her stomach twist because somewhere behind those walls, Luca was turning himself into the monster she had begged him not to be. At the end of the tunnel, a metal door opened to the cliff path. Wind nearly knocked her sideways. Marco appeared from the fog, rain streaming down his face. This way. They ran toward a waiting SUV hidden near the tree line. Then a man stepped from behind it. Julian. Grace stopped so abruptly, Marco nearly collided with her. Julian wore a dark coat over what remained of his wedding suit. Rain plastered his hair to his forehead. His handsome face looked stripped now. All charm dissolved into fury. Grace, he said. Marco moved in front of her. 2 Belandi men emerged from the trees behind Julian. Julian smiled. Careful, I only need her alive. Grace's pulse roared. You followed us. I followed him, Julian said. Luca is predictable when it comes to damaged things. Grace's face hardened. I'm not damaged. Julian's smile thinned. No? Then why does every man who gets close to you end up trying to fix you? The words hit exactly where he aimed them. For months, Julian had learned her insecurities like passwords. But something had changed since the cathedral. Grace had stood in her mother's house, opened her mother's vault, read her mother's warning. She was tired of being translated by cruel men. You never wanted to fix me, she said. You wanted to own what she left me. Julian's eyes flicked to the folder. There it is. He stepped closer. Marco reached for his weapon. A shot rang out from the trees. Marco went down hard, struck in the shoulder. Grace screamed. Julian grabbed her arm. Pain shot through the bruised wrist. Grace twisted, slammed the folder against his face, and ran. He caught her veil remnants at her collar, yanking her back. She stumbled against him, rain blinding her. You stupid girl, he hissed. You have no idea what you're carrying. Neither do you, she spat. His hand tightened. Then the entire cliffside lit with headlights. Black SUVs surged from the fog. Julian looked up. Luca stepped from the front vehicle. Blood darkened the side of his shirt. His coat was gone. Rain ran down his face, but he moved with terrifying calm. Grace stopped struggling. Not because she was safe. Because the look on Luca's face made every man around them understand something final had entered the world. Julian shoved Grace in front of him like a shield. Luca stopped. For the first time, Grace saw his control crack. His eyes locked on Julian's hand gripping her throat. Let her go, Luca said. Julian laughed, but it shook. You won't shoot. No. Luca walked forward one step. I won't. The men behind him raised their guns. Luca lifted a hand. They lowered them. Grace's heart pounded. Julian pressed closer to her ear. You see? He's just another man using you. He needs what's in that vault. Luca's gaze never left Grace. Look at me, he said. She did. His voice changed. Softened? No, not exactly. It became something more dangerous than softness. Intimate restraint. You are going to step on his foot as hard as you can, then drop. Julian tightened his grip. Don't. Grace slammed her heel down. Julian cursed. She dropped. Luca moved. The distance between them vanished. He struck Julian once, fast and brutal, knocking him away from Grace. Julian hit the ground near the cliff's edge, choking on rain and blood. Luca did not continue. He went to Grace first. Kneeling in the mud, he reached for her, then stopped. Are you hurt? Grace stared at him, shaking. You're bleeding, she whispered. He looked confused for half a second, as if his own blood were irrelevant. Then Julian laughed from the ground. You really don't know, do you? Julian rasped. Luca turned his head. Julian spat blood and smiled at Grace. Ask him why your mother really chose him. Ask him what happens if you don't marry before 30. Grace went cold. Luca's expression hardened. Julian saw it and laughed again. There it is, the clause. Grace looked at Luca. What clause? Luca said nothing. The silence was an answer. Grace stood slowly. What clause, Luca? Julian pushed himself up on one elbow. If Grace remains unmarried by 30, control of the Ellison trust passes temporarily to its emergency guardian. Rain hammered the cliffside. Grace's eyes stayed on Luca. Julian smiled wider. And who do you think Vivienne Ellison named? Grace stepped back. No. Luca's jaw tightened. Grace. No. The betrayal hit like cold water in the lungs. You become guardian of my inheritance? Temporarily. You knew. Yes. And you didn't tell me. I was going to. When? After I trusted you? After I opened the vault? After you made yourself look like my only option? Something flickered across his face. Pain, quickly buried. Julian laughed softly. Careful, Moretti. She almost believed you were different. Luca turned and struck him again. This time Julian stayed down. Grace flinched. Not from Julian's pain. From Luca's violence becoming easier in the exact moment his truth became harder. She looked at him through the rain. You told me you didn't want to own me. I don't. But legally, you could. I would never use it. You expect me to believe that? His voice dropped. No. That hurt more, because he understood why she couldn't. Grace backed away from him. Marco, pale and bleeding, struggled to sit up. Luca's men moved around them, securing Julian and the Belandi men, but Grace barely saw them. She saw only Luca, the man who had saved her, the man who had hidden a truth that made him powerful over her. I want to leave, she said. Luca went still. No, he said. Grace's eyes flashed. You don't get that word. His face tightened like she had struck him. Then he forced himself to step back. Take her to the north safe house, he told Marco. I said I want to leave. Luca looked at her, rain and blood on his face. You can hate me somewhere secure. Grace shook her head. You still think protection gives you permission. The words cut him. She saw it. For 1 second, his mask broke completely. Then it returned. Take her, he said. Grace left him on the cliff in the rain. The North Safe House was an old lighthouse, converted into a hidden residence on a remote stretch of coastline. It had stone walls, narrow windows, and a bedroom overlooking the sea. Grace did not sleep. By dawn, the news had changed again. The leaked footage from the cliffside had already appeared online. Grace in Luca's coat, Julian restrained by Moretti men, Luca kneeling in front of her in the rain. The headlines were worse. Runaway heiress caught between fiancé and mafia king. The bride, the boss, and the billion-dollar trust. Who really owns Grace Ellison? That last one made Grace throw the remote across the room. Elena found her in the kitchen hours later, staring at untouched coffee. Mr. Moretti called, she said gently. Grace did not look up. I'm sure he did. He asked if you had eaten. Tell him I've consumed betrayal. Very filling. Elena's mouth almost smiled. Grace sighed, guilt softening her irritation. Sorry. No need. Grace looked toward the ocean. Did you know about the guardian clause? Elena hesitated. That was answer enough. Grace laughed hollowly. Everyone knew except me. Your mother trusted Mr. Moretti with dangerous things, Elena said. My mother trusted a man who could become the legal guardian of my fortune. That doesn't make me feel better. No, Elena said, but she also wrote another document. Grace turned. Elena reached into her apron and removed a sealed envelope. Mr. Moretti told me to give this to you if you asked about the clause. Grace stared at it. He had this ready? Yes. Of course he did. She opened it anyway. Inside was not her mother's handwriting. It was Luca's. Grace, if you are reading this, then I failed to tell you before someone else used it to hurt you. Your mother named me emergency guardian because every respectable man around her had already been bought. The clause activates only if 3 conditions are met. You are unmarried at 30. The trust is under legal attack. And you are declared incapacitated by a court. Julian intended to marry you before that. If he failed, he intended to have you declared unstable. Either way, he needed control. I never wanted the trust. I wanted the clause because it gave me one legal reason to stand between you and men who would otherwise smile while destroying you. I should have told you. I did not because I was afraid that once you knew, you would run from the only protection I could still offer. That was control disguised as caution. You were right. Luca. Grace read it twice, then a third time. Anger remained, but beneath it, something worse unfolded. Understanding. He had hidden the truth because he feared losing the ability to protect her. That did not excuse it. It made it more dangerous, because it was not greed. It was obsession beginning to speak in the language of necessity. That evening, Grace found a security feed on the laptop Elena had left. She should not have opened it. She did. One camera showed Luca in a room she recognized from his mansion. He sat alone at a table covered with files. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, bandaged beneath. He looked exhausted in a way she had not seen before. Marco entered the frame, arm in a sling. There's a cleaner way, Marco said. Luca did not look up. No. Marry her yourself. The clause becomes irrelevant. Julian loses standing. Ashcroft loses the petition. Belandi backs off. Grace's hand went cold on the keyboard. Luca was silent. Marco continued. It solves everything. Luca looked up then. His face was lethal. She is not a solution. Marco went still. Luca's voice lowered. If anyone in this house says that again, they leave my house. Grace stopped breathing. Marco nodded slowly. Understood. After he left, Luca remained still for a long time. Then he reached into the file and removed a photograph. Grace leaned closer to the screen. It was from the wedding. Luca carrying her down the cathedral steps. He stared at it not like a man admiring a conquest. Like a man reliving the second he almost lost control in front of the world. Then he placed the photograph face down. Grace closed the laptop. The lighthouse felt suddenly too small. The next morning, she made a decision. She called Luca. He answered on the first ring. Grace. Just her name. Nothing else. No apology. No demand. It made her pulse ache. I want to expose Julian, she said. A pause. You have a plan. Yes. Tell me. No. Meet me in New York. His silence sharpened. That is not safe. I know. Grace. I am not asking permission. Another pause. Then quietly, no, you are not. The plan was simple and reckless. Julian had scheduled a press conference at the Ashcroft Hotel, where he intended to announce a civil action against Luca Moretti and request a formal wellness inquiry into Grace's condition. Grace intended to walk into that press conference with the vault documents. Luca hated the plan, which was partly why she liked it. You will be surrounded by cameras, lawyers, police, and men we cannot search, he said in the back of the SUV as they entered Manhattan. Grace looked out at the rain-dark city. Good. That is your defense? That is my stage. His eyes moved to her profile. She wore a black dress now, simple and severe, her hair pinned back, her mother's gold ring on a chain beneath the fabric. No veil, no diamond, no man's symbol on her hand. You sound like you're going to war, Luca said. Grace turned to him. Aren't I? For a moment, something like pride moved through his face. Then concern buried it. You stay within 5 feet of me. No. His eyes narrowed. I won't be seen hiding behind you, she said. I'm not asking you to hide. You're asking me to stand where you can reach me. Yes. Why? His answer came too fast. Security. Grace leaned closer, her voice soft enough to be dangerous. Try again. The air changed. The SUV became suddenly intimate, rain tapping the roof like a warning. Luca looked at her mouth, only for half a second. Then away. Because when I cannot reach you, he said, I make poor decisions. Grace's breath caught. There it was. Not a confession. Worse. En admission. She should have pulled back. She did not. And when you can, she whispered. His eyes returned to hers. I make different poor decisions. The SUV stopped. The moment broke. Outside, reporters crowded beneath the Ashcroft Hotel canopy. Police barricades lined the street. Cameras turned as Luca stepped out first. The noise rose instantly. Then, Grace emerged. The noise became chaos. She did not take Luca's arm, but she felt him beside her, a wall of controlled violence in a black coat. Julian stood at the podium inside the ballroom, mid-sentence, when Grace entered. His face froze. Victor Ashcroft stood behind him, older, colder, less theatrical. At his side was a woman in an ivory suit Grace had seen at dinners but never properly met. Luca's gaze sharpened on the woman. Grace noticed. Who is she? She whispered. Serena Bellandi. Rival mafia royalty. Grace's stomach tightened. So the rival family had stopped hiding. Julian recovered, smiling for the cameras. Grace, he said warmly. Thank God. She walked to the podium. He lowered his voice as she approached. Careful. Grace smiled back. It did not reach her eyes. No, she said. You first. Then she turned to the cameras. My name is Grace Ellison. 2 days ago, I was supposed to marry Julian Ashcroft. Today I am releasing documents proving that his family manipulated my mother's trust, bribed a judge, replaced my legal counsel, and attempted to have me declared mentally unstable in order to seize control of my inheritance. The ballroom exploded. Julian reached for the microphone. Luca moved one step. Julian stopped. Grace removed a hard drive from her purse and held it up. The evidence has already been sent to federal investigators, 3 newspapers, and every board member of the Ellison Foundation. Victor Ashcroft's face went gray. Serena Bellandi smiled faintly, as if impressed. Julian leaned close to Grace, rage masked by panic. You stupid girl, he whispered. You have no idea what you just started. Grace whispered back, Yes, I do. Then Serena Bellandi raised her hand. The doors locked. The lights went out. For 1 second, the ballroom plunged into screams and darkness. Luca's hand found Grace's waist and pulled her against him. Not roughly, precisely. Down, he ordered. Gunfire cracked through the ballroom windows. Glass rained across the marble floor. Reporters screamed. Guests scattered. Security shouted into radios. Luca covered Grace with his body behind the podium. She felt his breath near her ear. Are you hit? No. Stay behind me. Luca. Not now. There was no softness in him now. No conflict. No almost touch. The man beside her had become pure survival. But when he looked down at her, checking her face, his eyes betrayed him. Fear, raw and unhidden. A bullet struck the podium. Grace flinched into him. His arm tightened. Across the dark ballroom, Serena Bellandi walked calmly toward a side exit, protected by 2 men. Julian was on the floor, bleeding from a cut near his brow, crawling toward his father. Victor Ashcroft shouted something Grace couldn't hear. Luca looked toward the upper balcony. Sniper, he said. His men were already moving. Grace saw something near the stage curtain. Arrête dot. Not on Luca. On her. She froze. Luca saw her face and turned. The shot came. He shoved her down and took the impact in his shoulder. Grace screamed his name. Luca staggered but did not fall. For the first time since she had known him, his control shattered completely. Not because he was wounded. Because she had almost been. His expression changed into something terrifying. He turned toward the balcony, eyes black with a rage so cold it silenced even the men around him. Find him, he said. 2 words. A death sentence. Grace grabbed his arm. You're hit. He looked down at the blood spreading through his shirt. Then at her hands on him. I've had worse. I don't care. That stopped him. The ballroom chaos blurred around them. Luca stared at her, breathing hard, blood running down his arm. Grace's voice broke. I care. For 1 suspended second, the war around them disappeared. His hand lifted toward her face. This time, he touched her. Just 2 fingers against her cheek, feather light despite the blood on his sleeve. The intimacy of it nearly destroyed her. Then Marco shouted, Boss, we need to move. Luca pulled away first. Of course he did. They escaped through the hotel's service corridors as alarms screamed overhead. Grace ran beside Luca, refusing to be carried, though he was bleeding badly enough to leave drops on the floor. At the loading dock, an SUV waited. Before they reached it, Julian appeared from a side hallway holding a gun with both hands. His face was wild. "Stop," he shouted. Everyone froze. Grace's heart hammered. Julian pointed the gun at her. Luca stepped in front of her without hesitation. Julian laughed shakily. "Of course. Put it down," Luca said. "No. No. I finally understand." Julian's hand trembled. "It was never just the trust. You want her." Grace's breath caught. Luca said nothing. Julian's smile cracked. "Say it. Say it in front of her." Luca's shoulders rose and fell once. "Put the gun down." Julian looked at Grace. "He'll ruin you. Men like him don't love. They consume." Grace stepped beside Luca. He shifted instantly, trying to block her again. She pushed his arm down. "No," she whispered. "Let me." Luca's jaw clenched, but he let her stand. Grace faced Julian. "You're wrong," she said. Julian's eyes narrowed. "Luca is dangerous," she continued. "Controlling, secretive, violent, and I may never fully understand the world he lives in." Luca turned his head slightly toward her, expression unreadable. Grace held Julian's gaze. "But you wanted to make me smaller. He wanted me alive, even when I hated him for how he did it." Julian's face twisted. "That isn't love," he snapped. Grace's voice softened. "No, but it's closer than anything you ever offered." Julian's hand tightened on the gun. Luca saw it. The movement was barely visible. He shoved Grace behind him as Julian fired. The shot went wide. Luca's men surged forward. Julian was disarmed in seconds, slammed against the concrete, screaming as the gun skittered across the floor. Luca did not look at him. He looked only at Grace. The fear in his eyes was naked now. "You don't step in front of guns," he said, voice low and shaking with rage. Grace stared at him. "Neither do you." "That is different. Because you matter less?" His expression went still. The question hit something deep, something he had built a life around, never answering. Grace stepped closer despite the blood, the alarms, the men watching. "You don't get to protect me like my life is sacred and yours is disposable." Luca looked away. She touched his uninjured arm. He went completely still under her hand. "Look at me," she whispered. Slowly, he did. For a moment, the feared man in front of her looked unbearably tired. "You promised my mother," Grace said. "But I am not my mother. And I am not a debt you have to pay." His voice was rough. "No. Then what am I?" The question hung between them. Marco cleared his throat from a respectful distance. "Boss. Police are 2 minutes out." Luca's eyes stayed on Grace. He did not answer. "Not yet." They took him to a private clinic hidden behind a legitimate luxury wellness center outside the city. The doctor removed the bullet from Luca's shoulder while Grace stood outside the glass wall, arms wrapped around herself. She had seen blood before. Not like that. Not because of her. Elena brought coffee. Marco gave updates. Julian was in custody. Victor Ashcroft had disappeared. Serena Belandi had escaped. The hard drive had gone public. Federal agencies were pretending they had not been embarrassed on live television. Grace heard all of it through water. Her mind stayed on Luca's face when the bullet hit. Not pain. Fear. For here. Hours later, Luca woke in a private room overlooking the Hudson. Night covered the windows. The city glittered beyond the glass like it had no conscience. Grace sat beside his bed. His eyes opened slowly. The first word out of his mouth was, "Grace." She leaned back, exhaling. "You're alive." He looked at her face, then the room, then his bandaged shoulder. Unfortunately for several people, she almost laughed, almost cried. Instead, she said, "Julian was arrested." "Good." Victor ran. "Expected." Serena Belandi escaped. His eyes sharpened. "Less good. The evidence is public." He watched her carefully. "And you?" Grace looked down at her hands. "I don't know." Luca said nothing. That was one of the dangerous things about him. He knew when silence could pull the truth from a person. "I spent months thinking Julian was the worst thing that could happen to me," Grace said. "Then you arrived and made everything worse and safer at the same time." His mouth tightened. "I should have told you about the clause." "Yes. I should have told you many things." "Yes." His gaze lowered. "I have lived too long believing information is only useful if controlled." Grace studied him. "And people?" His answer came quietly. "I have controlled them too. Will you control me?" His eyes returned to hers. "No." The word was immediate. Grace wanted to believe it. That scared her. Why? She asked. Because you would hate me. That's the only reason? His jaw flexed. No. The room seemed to narrow around them. Grace leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Then answer the question from the loading dock. His eyes darkened. What am I to you? Luca closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the cold mask was gone. Not completely. It would never fully vanish. But enough. Enough that she saw the man beneath the empire. At first, he said, a promise. Grace's throat tightened. Then a responsibility. She nodded slowly. Then a problem, he continued. Because you didn't obey fear the way people do around me. Despite herself, she smiled faintly. His eyes softened by a fraction. Then a threat. To you? To the man I know how to be. Grace stopped breathing. Luca looked at her as if each word cost him something. Now you are the only person whose absence feels louder than war. The room went silent. Grace stared at him. It was not a simple confession. It was not gentle. It was Luca Moretti admitting dependence the way another man might confess a crime. She looked away before he could see how deeply it struck her. Luca, I am not asking you for anything, he said. That made her look back. His voice was controlled again, but barely. Not forgiveness. Not trust. Not your hand. Not your inheritance. Not your future. He swallowed once. I only need you alive long enough to choose all of it for yourself. Grace's eyes burned. That was when she understood the difference between Julian and Luca. Julian had wanted her choice removed. Luca, for all his darkness, wanted her choice protected even from himself. It did not make him safe. It made him honest in the one place Julian had been most cruel. Grace stood. Luca's expression closed, bracing for her to leave. Instead, she reached for his hand. His fingers were warm, strong, still. War! He looked at their joined hands like he had never seen anything more dangerous. I'm still angry, she said. I know. I still don't trust all of you. You shouldn't. I may leave when this is over. His face did not change, but she felt his hand tighten once before he controlled it. I know. Grace looked at him for a long time. But tonight, she whispered, I'm staying. Luca closed his eyes. Just for a second. When he opened them, the devotion there was restrained, but unmistakable. Then I will not waste it, he said. Grace sat beside him until dawn. The final confrontation came 3 days later. Victor Ashcroft was found hiding at the Ellison coastal estate. Not running. Waiting. He had gone back to the beginning because he believed the vault still held something Grace had missed. He was right. The last file in the vault was not about money. It was about blood. Grace returned to the estate with Luca against every security recommendation. The sky was gray, the sea violent, the house colder than before. Federal agents had sealed the greenhouse. But Luca's people moved first. Quieter, faster, darker. Victor stood in the library beneath Vivienne Ellison's portrait, holding a gun in one hand and a faded document in the other. He looked older now, not powerful, desperate. Grace walked in before Luca could stop her. Victor smiled. You look like her. Grace did not answer. Luca entered behind her. Victor's smile shifted. Moretti. Still playing guardian angel? Luca's voice was ice. Put down the gun. Victor laughed. You think this ends with evidence? Lawyers? Headlines? Your family's built this country in shadows. Mine simply learned from yours. Grace looked at the document in his hand. What is that? Victor's eyes gleamed. The original marriage contract. Grace went still. Luca's face hardened. Victor continued. Your mother was promised to me before she ran off with poets and lawyers and dead men. The Ellison Trust was built to return to my bloodline through marriage. Julian was not stealing anything. He was correcting history. Grace felt sick. You're insane. No, Victor said. I am patient. He lifted the gun toward Luca. Grace stepped forward. Luca's voice cracked like a whip. Grace. Victor smiled. There she is, her mother's daughter, always stepping toward the wrong man. Grace's heart hammered. You never loved my mother, she said. Victor's face twitched. You wanted to possess her, and when she refused, you waited for me. His eyes darkened. You know nothing. I know enough. Grace reached beneath her collar and pulled out her mother's ring on the chain. Victor stared at it. His face changed. Rage, grief, obsession, rotted by time. She kept that? He whispered. She kept the man she loved, Grace said. Not you. Victor's hand trembled. That was when Luca moved. A blur of black and violence. The gun went off, shattering the portrait above the fireplace. Grace screamed as glass and canvas rained down. Luca slammed Victor against the desk, twisting the weapon away. Victor reached for a hidden blade. Grace saw it before Luca did. Luca turned just enough. The blade cut across his side instead of his throat. His face went white with pain. Something inside Grace snapped. She grabbed the heavy brass candlestick from the mantel and struck Victor's arm with everything she had. The blade fell. Luca threw Victor to the floor and pinned him there, one hand at his throat. The room froze. Grace saw Luca's face. Not controlled now. Not cold. This was the edge. The place where love and violence became indistinguishable in him. Victor choked beneath his hand. Luca leaned close. You touched her life before she was born. Victor clawed at his wrist. You put your hands on her future. Luca's grip tightened. Grace stepped closer. Luca. He did not seem to hear. His eyes were black, fixed on Victor. Luca, she said again, softer. Nothing. Grace touched his face. That reached him. His breathing was harsh. His hand remained at Victor's throat. Don't become him for me, Grace whispered. Luca looked at her. The room held its breath. Slowly, inch by inch, he released Victor. Federal agents stormed in seconds later, followed by Marco and Luca's men. Victor was dragged up, coughing, furious. Alive. Grace did not look at him. She looked at Luca. Blood darkened his shirt again. You listened, she said. His mouth tightened. Barely. But you did. He looked at her like that mattered more than winning. Outside, rain began again. Soft this time. Not the violent storm from the wedding. Something quieter. Cleansing. Weeks passed before New York stopped talking about the runaway bride and the Mafia Boss. Julian accepted a plea agreement after Serena Belandi abandoned him publicly. Victor Ashcroft faced federal charges tied to bribery, conspiracy, attempted coercion, and financial fraud. The Belandi family lost 3 ports, 2 judges, and one very expensive illusion of untouchability. Grace regained control of the Ellison Trust. Her first act was to dissolve every clause that gave any man emergency authority over her life. Her second was to reopen her mother's foundation under a new mission: legal protection for women trapped in coercive marriages and financial abuse. Luca donated money anonymously. Grace returned it. He sent it again through 6 shell companies. She found all 6 and returned those 2. The 7th time, he delivered the check himself. Grace found him standing outside her new office in the restored Ellison Foundation building, wearing a black coat, no entourage visible, though she was certain they were nearby. It was snowing lightly over Manhattan. Not raining, for once. Grace crossed her arms. You're persistent. Luca looked at the building behind her. You're difficult. I prefer thorough. I noticed. She held up the envelope. I'm not taking your money. It is not mine. Luca. It came from the sale of Julian's private club. Grace paused. Luca continued. The one where he met Belandi contacts. I bought it, closed it, sold the building. Consider it poetic redistribution. Grace tried not to smile. Failed. Luca saw it. The smallest change moved through his face, like sunrise touching a locked room. You look different, she said. I was shot twice and emotionally interrogated by an heiress. That would change anyone. Apparently, they stood beneath the falling snow, the city moving around them. No cathedral, no cameras, no gunfire. Just a dangerous man and the woman he had carried into a storm. Grace looked at him. Are you still watching my apartment? No. She raised an eyebrow. 1 car, he admitted. Luca. 2 blocks away. Luca. 3 blocks. She stared at him. He exhaled. No cars. Thank you. A pause. Marco checks the building cameras. Luca. I am evolving slowly. This time, Grace laughed. The sound caught him unprepared. For a second, he looked almost young. Almost. Then the old restraint returned, but softer at the edges. Grace stepped closer. You know I'm not ready to belong to anyone. His eyes held hers. I know. I may never want marriage. I know. I won't be hidden. I would burn the hiding place first. Her breath caught. There he was again. Too intense. Too dangerous. Too much. And still, somehow, exactly honest. Grace looked down at the snow gathering on the sidewalk. My mother told me not to marry a man who wanted my light but resented the heat. Luca said nothing. Grace looked back up. What would you do with the heat? His gaze lowered to her mouth. then returned to her eyes. "Stand close enough to burn," he said. The words moved through her slowly. She stepped nearer until only inches remained between them. Luca did not touch her. He waited. The restraint mattered. Grace lifted her hand and touched the lapel of his coat. His breathing changed. Barely. But she felt it. "I'm still choosing," she whispered. His voice dropped. "I know. Today I choose dinner." Something like relief crossed his face. Not triumph. Never triumph. "Dinner," he repeated, as if the word were sacred. And no security inside the restaurant. His expression cooled immediately. "No." Grace smiled. "Negotiable?" "No. One table away." "Tifo." Across the room. "Grace." She tilted her head. He stared at her for a long moment, then said with visible pain, "Across the room." She smiled fully. Luca looked ruined by it. As they walked into the snow together, a black SUV waited at the curb. Grace stopped. Luca followed her gaze. "It's not security," he said. She looked at him. "It's transportation. With 3 armed men inside? Professional drivers." "Luca." He opened the door for her, face perfectly serious. "Very protective drivers." Grace shook her head, but she got in. Luca sat beside her, close enough that his shoulder almost touched hers. Almost. The city glowed beyond the tinted glass. Snow softened the edges of Manhattan. Somewhere behind them stood a cathedral where Grace had lost a life she never wanted. Somewhere ahead waited a future she would choose piece by piece, without contracts, without cages, without men deciding her worth. She looked at Luca. He was watching the city, not her, giving her the dignity of not being studied. But his hand rested between them on the leather seat, palm down, still, waiting. Grace looked at it for a long time. Then she placed her hand over his. Luca went completely motionless. The most feared man in New York did not breathe for 3 seconds. Grace smiled faintly and looked out the window. "Don't make it dramatic," she said. His fingers slowly turned beneath hers, closing around her hand with careful restraint. Outside, snow fell over the dark city. Inside the SUV, Luca Moretti held Grace Ellison's hand like a promise he was terrified to break. And for the first time since the cathedral doors opened, Grace did not feel carried away from her life. She felt like she was finally walking into it.